G'day and welcome to our analysis of Chapter 4 of Crow Country by Kate Constable. This chapter represents a time where a reasonable amount of time has passed and both Ellie and Sadie seem to be in a bit of a routine. So it doesn't tell us exactly how long, but there's the hints there that it's been a significant period of time by now. And we've got this chapter here that kind of does highlight a little bit more of the tension and difficulty that's going to unfold between mother and daughter. Anyway, let's have a look, see what's in here. I'm going to read through this opening bit just to put it into context. 3 days a week, Ellie was supposed to finish her shift at the hospital in time to walk home with Sadie after school. The school and the hospital were practically next door to each other, but no matter how long Sadie dawdled, Ellie was never ready to leave when she arrived. So again, we've got this idea that somehow Ellie has let Sadie down, and we have so many of those little references like that it shows the tension that this relationship causes, particularly for Sadie. Anyway, we've got some more ideas represented here. And we've got this introduction to another character. And it's this Aboriginal boy that Sadie had seen around school, but there's no name mentioned yet. That doesn't come out till later in this chapter. And all she really knows is that he's from Mildura, up on the Murray River. And this idea of where we come from and place and our history and our heritage is something that gets explored later in the text. But this is the description, this is the information we find out about this new character, about Walter. Everyone knew he'd been in trouble with the police, though no one seemed to know exactly what he'd done. Someone said he'd stolen a car, someone else said he'd stabbed a kid in a playground, and someone else said he'd been caught dealing drugs. Everyone agreed that he was a psycho. Now, quotes like this highlight the issue of stereotypes and racism, and we can clearly see how Walter here, this person, is treated or judged simply because he is an Aboriginal boy who's had to move from one town to another. And many people are making quite harsh criticisms about this character without knowing anything about him. And this is an idea that we see in many aspects of our society. So it really isn't a surprise to us, I suppose. Later in the chapter, we see the interaction here between more of the characters. And we are introduced to David, or David Webster is his whole name. And it says here he's a social worker and he looks after the whole area. And this is someone that Ellie used to know when she lived or visited or was part of this community previously. And David explains, he's come and gone a bit, haven't been sitting in my bum by the lake for the last 20 years. David grinned and stuck out a big warm hand to shake Sadie's. So he's a very welcoming person. And the way he speaks is very Australian, very I haven't been sitting on my bum by the lake for the last 20 years. He captures that that notion of being an Aussie quite well, although we'll learn a lot about his character as we proceed. You'll notice too that introduction to David is much warmer than our introduction to Walter. There's very different ways of approaching these two characters, and even though both of them are Aboriginal, David appears to be much more down to earth and has that very friendly dialogue to establish his character, whereas Walter doesn't get a chance to establish himself at all. It's society and their judgment that has established what sort of character Walter is. Alright, let's move on. I love this saying, don't crack the sads with me. It's such an Aussie colloquial expression. You couldn't say it in any other context or culture and be understood. And it's probably a benefit. It's to benefit the teenage audience that's reading this sort of text. Great line. And we move on to this large chunk, or this passage here. And this is where Ellie reveals some information about her past to Sadie and of course to us. David and I, Ellie said in a low voice, well, we used to go out together. She glanced about, but there was no one within earshot. Years ago, before I met your father. But it was difficult. Because he's black? Yes, partly. Mostly. Ellie hesitated and dropped a packet of basmati rice into the basket. It was complicated. There was stuff going on. We were young. We just didn't know how to make it work. But we're older now, and hopefully wiser. You can see through that not even Ellie can articulate to her daughter the complexities of that relationship and why it didn't work. And it's obviously not a conversation that you just have at this supermarket, even though you can tell that Ellie doesn't really want to reveal a lot of this information. She's very guarded about who she shares it with, and that's depicted in her desire to make sure no one overhears. And then it moves on. Ellie laughed. He told me he's single, and I picked up a certain vibe. Don't you think there was a certain vibe? She punched Sadie's shoulder. Don't you reckon? You think I'm rushing things again, don't you? Sadie frowned. Like you rushed into moving to the country. Like you rushed into breaking up with Dad. Like you rushed into asking Walter back to our place when he doesn't even know us. But she didn't say anything. And that passage there really does capture the thought processes and the emotional response that Sadie's feeling at this point. She doesn't feel like she's listened to, and she doesn't feel like anything she says to her mother is actually going to sink in. And you can see all of these areas, or these parts of their lives where they are in conflict. And you can see here how much blame Sadie is placing on her mother for these parts of her life that perhaps haven't worked out as either of them might have wanted them to. So it's interesting that we're now getting to the background of both these characters. Ellie reveals a lot about what's happened to her previously, and part of her motivation maybe for returning. And Sadie reveals the reasons why she has a lot of this distrust for her mother. There's a lot of unresolved tension and difference that's been building up over the last few years. Alright, anything else in my notes? Yeah, one of the things you'll notice here is in my opinion at least, the almost teenage or childish way that Ellie is discussing this relationship with her daughter. You would expect this to be the other way around, and that the mother would have a lack of interest in her daughter's relationship, thinking it was just some superficial or spur of the moment sort of thing. But here it's almost like the roles are reversed, and it's the daughter who is standing back and providing that sort of critical eye, or the eyes, or the voice of wisdom almost, while the mother is off trying to win, in this case, David's heart yet again. And she's a victim to her emotions. This part here, it's not overly important, but it's worth mentioning at least. It shows how the fact that Sadie's willing to voice this idea that there are crows on her mind, it speaks of how much of an impact her experiences with the crows and the crow spirit has had on her. And it's going to continue to intrigue her, which links nicely to the sort of mystery element of the text. And as Sadie and Walter have a discussion, and it's quite a forced discussion, like they're not obviously happy to be in each other's company here. They've been thrust together simply because of circumstance. But as the conversation unfolds, it comes to this pivotal moment. "So you don't need another dad?" said Walter. "No. And I got my own mum, so I don't need a new mum either." They looked at each other in the gathering dusk. It was getting hard to see. "Glad we got that sorted," said Sadie. It's almost as if these two are now united by their desire to not be forced together and not to encourage their respective mothers and uncle to get together. And it's interesting that that's what brings these two together, because they do have a lot in common and they are very likeable characters. Walter made a soft noise that might have been a chuckle. "Uncle says your real name's Saturday. Reckon he was having a joke with me." "No, it's true," Sadie sighed. "But no one ever calls me Saturday. I hate it. It's a stupid name. There was a warrior back when the white fellas first came. They called him Saturday. He fought for our lands, like a guerrilla fighter. He resisted. He was a hero, Uncle told me." Sadie wished she hadn't been so quick to call Saturday a stupid name. What happened to him? Got killed. Oh. Now, it's a really important passage here, but it's glossed over by the characters because they don't understand the significance of what it is they're actually discussing. But this idea of the name that we have and the importance that it carries and the way that it affects our identity so much is beginning to be explored in this. And it's another example of one of those things that will become more relevant later on. So it's foreshadowing events and issues that will be depicted later. And it's a bit of a surprise to us that that is Sadie's real name. And it's as though she's hiding her identity. She's pretending to be somebody else. And as the story progresses and Sadie falls back into I can't really say too much without giving a little bit of the story away, but that's the sort of experience that Sadie will go through in terms of having to change her identity a little bit in order to come to understand the truth. So it's a really interesting way to introduce that concept at this early stage. And it's good to see that she's disappointed in herself for not recognising the significance of such a name. And Walter, he doesn't seem too fazed by it, but it's almost like he's just given her some kind of prophecy, as if the name Saturday is associated with people who can be heroes, who can resist, who can be a kind of fighter. And again, I think that's foreshadowing events to come, and it's sort of establishing Sadie's fate. What a great way to introduce some pretty complex ideas in the text. Hope that helps you understand the chapter a little bit more. This has been an ETV production brought to you by Prindiville Catholic College.